How is generative AI being embraced across BFSI GCCs?
I think it's important to note that artificial intelligence as a whole is not new to the BFSI industry. And then to bring it together, I think organizations will have to kind of figure out how will they strike the balance between empowerment and governance.
How is generative AI set to change the game for your business?
We are aggressively pursuing prompt engineering training for all our employees. Will the average job that we do within banks or financial service industries or with insurance, will that get changed? Probably, yes. But I think we will become more value additive in a different manner. We should look at it as a transformative agent, something that brings a challenge to rethink the way that we do our work and not necessarily as a threat.
Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Simulated Reality Podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Nilesh Iyer, CEO at Natixis Services India, for a conversation on a topic that's redefining the landscape of financial services, democratizing the future, how generative AI is revolutionizing banking and finance. Hi Nilesh, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here as well, Purvi. Thank you.
Let's dive into all
Let's
the
do
things
that.
I have today for you. How is generative AI being embraced across BFSI GCCs? And what paradigm shifts do you think it will create?
I think it's important to note that artificial intelligence as a whole is not new to the BFSI industry. For
Right.
banking as a whole, I think it's almost been now 3 or 4 decades that we've been using some form of artificial intelligence or the other, right? When it comes to things like algorithmic trading and so on, the capabilities of computing have been leveraged to transform banking for
Right.
now almost 3-4 decades, right? Now, the question that we are embraced with right now, or which we are facing right now, should I say, is what's the actual, ramification of something like generative AI
Right.
to the industry as a whole? And I think the jury is out on that still. We're still trying to figure our way out of it. That said, one of the things that I can say is that there will always be the typical 2 to 3, ways in which this could be impactful. The first is the fact that we will potentially look at those use cases which don't individually have a huge impact, but when taken collectively across an entire enterprise, right, they could be fairly transformative, right? In these cases, I think the typical approach that we will need to take is to democratize the utilization of generative AI, right? And I think this is happening right now. The other aspect is look at those big use cases, which are specific to a particular function, to a particular value chain, a product, or whatever. And then to figure out exactly what the implications of that are. I have seen some instances where this has been leveraged, but I think that that's still a little bit more in an experimental stage. Here, what will typically happen is that expert teams will get created who will be leveraging generative AI towards, making a pretty much an end-to-end transformation to a particular value chain, function, whatever have you, right? So that's something which, is probably a little bit more in its nascent stage in that sense. And then to bring it together, I think organizations will have to kind of figure out how will they strike the balance between empowerment and governance, right? And I think the one aspect of it is that thanks to regulation, thanks to, the world that we live in with cybersecurity issues and so on and so forth, it will be necessary to have governance, but the governance should not stifle or should not completely kill the empowerment and the enthusiasm of the practitioners of generative AI, right? So striking that balance between having good empowerment, but yet doing that with good governance to ensure that it does not open the organization up to no more risks, right? So I think that that's going to be one of the key aspects that will have to be thought through. So in a sense, if you were to think about it, the balance between the enterprise level empowerment and the enterprise level governance will probably encircle what will be this balance between democratization and evangelization, right? So I think between these, we will see the evolution of generative AI occur. And I think it's here to stay. It's a given capability, right? We just need to kind of start, seeing this snowball in a virtuous sense rather than in a destructive sense. Then let's see exactly how it shapes up.
Okay. So having said that, let me take your point of view, right? In your view, how is generative AI set to change the game for your business? And where does it fit into your big picture strategy?
So let me be specific. At Natixis, I think this is exactly the approach that we are taking, as I've just described, right? So there is our own internal implementation of a combination of ChatGPT as well as Gemini, which we've taken and we've rolled out across the board.
Okay.
Right. That's something that all employees can use. Right. We are aggressively pursuing, prompt engineering training for all our employees at Natixis services in India, and we've managed to achieve, I think, about 60% of adoption already now. And we'll continue to grow that because we think that this is a skill of the future. We think that folks should have the ability to at least know how to prompt a generative AI, engine. Right. The other side of it is that those use cases that I talked about, the evangelist use cases, which will act as the big examples of change occurring in the organization. There are some use cases which we are basically pursuing as well. And in the collective, I think we're still there's a policy that we have rolled out from a governance perspective, which specifically focuses upon generative AI. And we're looking to essentially figure out how do we strike that balance between the empowerment and the governance as well. So as I just said in my illustrative example, that's literally the framework that we have essentially adopted and rolled out across Natixis.
So you mentioned two things, right? One, so the training part, I'll come later to it.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, my question more to you is, as AI becomes more democratized, how are you ensuring it remains ethical, high quality, and safe for customers?
I think that's a great question, right? We all use it in our private lives. I, for example, utilize Copilot for figuring out my dietary plan for the week, for figuring out itineraries for planning. Believe me, it's hugely empowering and saves a lot of time, right? So that's down to an individual, and how you use it in your personal lives, that's a different story altogether.
Right.
The minute we bring that into the organizational framework, right? I think that some more sort of belts and braces need to be put in place, right? Because at the end of the day, we are all stewards of the reputation of the organization. We're all stewards to protect the organization against misutilization of technology, right? So I think that aspect of thought gets put into our cybersecurity, information security, and IT security aspects, which anyways sort of are kept in mind with the internal sort of implementation of generative AI. With that said, it's evolving. It evolves just as cyber risk evolves. It evolves just as any other risk related to IT evolves. And I think it takes collective intelligence, collective information sharing for us to kind of protect collectively the interests of our customers and of the industry as a whole, right? Regulation is also coming, and it's evolved in some instances. It's still coming in other instances. And as with any such situation, there will be the starting of the regulation, and then there will be the evolution of the regulation. Right. So we'll see both occur, right? So I think that trend will continue. I think in this instance, though, the thing that changes is the speed at which it happens. Because the evolution of generative AI itself is happening at speed, right? And I think the ability to kind of take that and retrofit it into evolving regulation and make sure that, the progress does not lead the regulation and that it happens in tandem and in parallel is going to be something that we'll all have to collectively think about and work on, right? But coming back to it, I think the utilization and the governance around generative AI, making sure that we utilize it ethically. In our personal lives, it's down to our own judgment. But at work, right, there are frameworks in place which help us make sure that those decisions are made appropriately. The interesting part of it is that this is not something which is uncommon to us. We use Microsoft Word or whatever word processing, software in our personal lives. Right. We use them at work as well. We don't categorize documents based on the level of confidentiality or the sensitivity in our personal lives, but we certainly do that in our professional lives. So also with spreadsheets, so also with everything else. So similar to that analogy, we're going to have to figure out exactly what the equivalent of that is with generative AI. I think we're arriving at that point, and we're going to have to continue to just make sure that that framework is fit for purpose.
While boosting productivity is often highlighted as a key benefit of democratizing AI, what other value levers do you think might be overlooked?
I would say that it's difficult to make a sweeping statement saying that there are value levers which are being undermined when we think of something which is as all pervasive as generative AI may become, right? If we look back to past instances of similar change, we thought that there will be a complete transformation of the way that we would do work when robotic process automation occurred, right?
Okay.
We thought that there would be a complete transformation of the way that we would do work when word processing changed, right? When email was introduced.
Right.
So many different things, right? Change and humanity's adoption to change, right? I think it's an interesting equilibrium that eventually gets struck. One side goes down, becomes more weighty. The other side, counteracts that action. It balances eventually, right? Will the average job that we do within banks or financial service industries or with insurance, will that get changed? Probably, yes. But I think we will become more value additive in a different manner, right? We will stop potentially looking at, the manually intensive, activities and start to kind of exercise our capabilities in another dimension. We saw that happen very successfully with low-code, no-code automation. We saw that happen very successfully with robotic process automation.
Right.
I have no doubt in my mind that that's exactly what's going to happen in this case as well. The eventual beneficiaries are likely going to be our clients and customers because they will likely see an organization which has transformed in a different manner. Right? And so I think we should look at it as a transformative agent, something that brings a challenge to rethink the way that we do our work and not necessarily as a threat, right?
Okay.
How we change our value proposition to our clients is a constant challenge that we ask ourselves at all times anyway, right? And we always try to kind of, augment that in one way or the other. I think that we're going to continue to do that.
Okay. There was this time when I told you that I have a question that I'm going to ask you on training, right? And this is the question I'm going to ask you now. Right?
Please.
So while you have said all of that, how do you plan to evaluate the success of your company-wide AI training? And what indicators will you tell that it's working and making a real impact? I said I'll ask you that, right? So.
Thanks for asking me that question. Look, I referred to it in passing. At Natixis, I think our thinking has been that this is a skill set of the future, which should not be restricted to any subset of the organization.
Right.
So we think everyone should be skilled in at least the basics of prompt engineering, across the organization. And we're doing that. We've rolled out a group BPCE-wide training, which everyone's basically welcome to take, right? All our employees have access to it and they can go through that. We've also said that, look, if you're going to engage with, generative AI in any manner, we recommend that you get this training, right? Now, then emerges two schools of thought. How do you, to your second part of your question, how do I know that this is actually doing its job? How do I know that it's being effective, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can always take the quantitative side of it and run a KPI of exactly how many people took the training. To me, sure, that's a way to measure progress, but it's not the way to measure progress. I think coupled with that, we also need to take qualitative and experiential feedback from the employees, right? To see, are they actually using it? How often are they using it? For what are they using it, right? So we've created a forum within our organization where once a month, people just get together and share use cases where they have used generative AI, where they have used other low-code, no-code automation mechanisms.
Right.
And they've tried to figure out, ways to do things which they think could be relevant for others in the organization as well.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. It's people just getting on a call and sharing their thoughts, their ideas, what seems to be working for them, what they were trying to do, but have hit a pit stop against, and they're trying to figure out how to kind of, navigate through that. All of those things are very, very powerful because they get the conversation going. They get people talking about this new phenomenon and how it's working or not working for them, and then gets other people thinking about how it could work, right? Or how it could be made to work for them, right? So I think this part of it is certainly one that I find more exciting, right? And something that I think we will continue to do as well.
I think that's Definitely very insightful. And that brings us to the end of a truly insightful conversation. Nilesh, thank you for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay connected for more conversations with industry trailblazers. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.